April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Cannes, France. The air was thin, brutally cold, and perfectly clear. High above the clouds, Oberleutnant Rolf Herrmann sat comfortably in the cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190A-5, watching the sky below with the calm confidence of a veteran fighter pilot. What he saw made him smile. Far beneath his formation, a group of American fighters was climbing slowly, awkwardly, engines straining at full power as they fought for altitude. They looked heavy. They looked clumsy. They looked completely out of place. Herrmann keyed his radio and joked to his wingman that the Americans had sent them flying milk bottles. Laughter crackled across the frequency. To German pilots who had spent years flying sleek Spitfires, nimble Messerschmitts, and agile Soviet fighters, these bulky American machines looked almost ridiculous. Barrel-shaped fuselages, oversized radial engines, wings that seemed too small for bodies that massive, and propellers larger than anything the Luftwaffe had ever fielded. They didn't look like fighters. They looked like easy kills. Below them, 16 Republic P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group continued their slow climb in tight formation. Each aircraft was powered by a 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial pushing nearly 7 tons of metal into the sky. To the Germans watching from above, it was obvious who held the advantage. The Luftwaffe had been fighting continuously since 1939. Its pilots were veterans of Poland, France, Britain, North Africa, and Russia. The Americans, by contrast, were flying their very first combat missions over Europe. They had 0 days of combat experience. Everything about the situation suggested this would be a short, one-sided encounter. What none of the German pilots could possibly know that morning was that they were witnessing the arrival of the aircraft that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe. Within 18 months, those same flying milk bottles would no longer be a joke. They would become instruments of terror. And the sound of their 8 synchronized Browning machine guns would become the most feared noise in German skies. The destruction was already built into the Thunderbolt. 8.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. 3,400 rounds of ammunition. A combined rate of fire approaching 6,000 rounds per minute. Enough concentrated firepower to tear a fighter apart in seconds. The transformation began that very morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. Blakesley, a former Eagle Squadron pilot who had flown RAF Spitfires only weeks earlier, understood something his men did not yet know. Survival in the P-47 required abandoning everything pilots thought they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt was a radical departure from European fighter design. While Germany had spent years perfecting lightweight interceptors optimized for climbing and turning, Republic Aviation had built something entirely different. A high-altitude juggernaut designed around mass, power, and overwhelming firepower. Among the 56 American pilots scattered across the French sky that day were men who would become legends, future aces whose names would later strike fear into the Luftwaffe. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an unproven aircraft, facing the most experienced fighter force in the world. This was no longer just a contest of skill. It was the opening chapter of a war between experience and industry. The P-47 Thunderbolt was born out of panic. In June 1940, German fighters swept across France with shocking speed, exposing the weakness of Allied air power. The U.S. Army Air Corps reacted with urgency, issuing specifications for a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. The task fell to Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer. Kartveli read the requirements and then deliberately ignored their spirit. Instead of a lightweight interceptor, he designed a monster. He famously told his team it would be a dinosaur, but a dinosaur with good proportions. When the XP-47B prototype first flew on May 6, 1941, it stunned everyone who saw it. At nearly 10,000 pounds empty, it was 65% heavier than its predecessor. The massive turbo supercharger system, with ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave the aircraft a swollen, almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time all asked the same question: "This thing actually flies?" It did more than fly. At altitude, it dominated. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters struggled for air. The exhaust-driven turbo-supercharger delivered near sea-level performance in the stratosphere, where conventional superchargers failed. But the Thunderbolt was unforgiving. During training, it killed American pilots at an alarming rate. Torque on takeoff flipped aircraft. Landings ended in wreckage. High-speed dives locked controls as pilots encountered compressibility for the first time. Between late 1942 and early 1943, the 56 Fighter Group lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in its early months of combat. Major Hub Zemke, the group's commander, openly despised the airplane. Yet those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would later become one of America's top aces, described his first flight by saying it felt like strapping yourself to a locomotive. You didn't fly it. You aimed it. Early combat seemed to confirm German confidence. The P-47 couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190. It couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109. At medium altitudes, it felt heavy and unresponsive. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below and forcing turning engagements where agility mattered more than firepower. Joseph Pips Priller, commander of Jägerschwader 26, reported after his first encounter that the new American fighter flew like a truck, turned like a freight train, and climbed like a pregnant cow. Statistics supported him. In the first month, American units lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed kills. Even RAF pilots quietly joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something important was being missed. The Thunderbolts that were shot down absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a mission riddled with cannon and machine gun holes that would have disintegrated a Spitfire or Messerschmitt. The air-cooled radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, survived hits that would have instantly killed liquid-cooled fighters. And when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were devastating. Their sustained fire created a zone of destruction German pilots had never experienced before. Unlike cannon with limited ammunition, the Thunderbolt could maintain fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. Everything changed on June 26, 1943. Lieutenant Robert Johnson's formation was returning from escort duty when they were ambushed by Focke-Wulf 190s diving out of the sun. Johnson's Thunderbolt was shredded almost instantly. Cannon shells exploded across the airframe. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Wounded and blinded by oil, Johnson tried to bail out, only to discover the canopy had been welded shut by an exploding shell. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. Yet the P-47 refused to die. Despite barely functioning controls and an engine shaking violently, Johnson leveled the aircraft and pointed it toward England. Then a lone German fighter found him. The German pilot emptied cannon ammunition into the crippled Thunderbolt. It kept flying. He switched to machine guns. It kept flying. Finally, the German pulled alongside, stared in disbelief, shook his head, saluted, and broke away. Johnson landed with over 200 bullet holes in his aircraft. 3 main structural beams were shot through. Any other fighter would have fallen apart. The Thunderbolt brought him home. From that moment on, German laughter turned to unease. American pilots began to understand how to fight the aircraft properly. Zemke drilled a simple rule into his men. Don't turn. Don't climb at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's mass became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, it could reach speeds German fighters could not follow, then convert that speed back into altitude. Dive, fire, and climb away. Boom and zoom. To German pilots, it felt like execution. By late 1943 and into 1944, the Thunderbolt evolved from escort fighter into something far worse. With improved propellers, external fuel tanks, bombs, and rockets, it became the most feared fighter bomber in Europe. Columns of vehicles vanished in seconds. Rail yards burned. Bridges collapsed. German troops learned to recognize the sound of approaching Thunderbolts long before they saw them. A deep, rolling thunder that meant death was coming from above. On D-Day, More than 500 P-47s sealed the sky over Normandy. German fighters that attempted to break through were annihilated. In the weeks that followed, Thunderbolts destroyed thousands of vehicles, tanks, locomotives, and supply columns, forcing the German army to move only at night. The Luftwaffe tried everything to counter them. More flak, more armor, new tactics. Nothing worked. By 1945, the truth was undeniable. The P-47 was not elegant. It was not graceful. It was brutal, overbuilt, overpowered. Produced in numbers Germany could never match. 15,000 Thunderbolts rolled off American assembly lines. Pilots arrived with hundreds of training hours. Lost aircraft were replaced overnight. Lost German pilots were gone forever. After the war, even Adolf Galland admitted the mistake. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around firepower, survivability, and industrial scale. In a war of attrition, that philosophy was unstoppable. The P-47 entered the war as a joke. It ended it as an executioner. German pilots laughed when they first saw it in 1943. By 1945, there was no one left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.